Welcome to the studio. I'm Joni Simon, food photographer. This is The Bite Shot, and this is where I share things that I've learned along my food photography journey in hopes that it helps you on yours. One of the questions I get often asked is, can you build a full-time business as a food photographer? Is there enough business out there? Absolutely. There's so much demand for food photography, but one thing that can help is to expand your vision, help you see the different kinds of clients that are out there. That sometimes we just think of food photography as sort of this narrow scope, but there's so many different kinds of clients out there. So I'm going to share with you some different ones that are out there in hopes that this is going to kind of reveal to you some different areas that you can pursue, as well as how to connect with these folks, where they hang out, where I've come across these people before, and some of the pros and cons to working with different kinds of clients. Now, one thing I want to define right here up front is some terminology that one of the things that was confusing to me when I first started as a food photographer is I heard people refer to it as commercial food photography. And I thought that that meant it was specifically only for advertisements, but that's not the case. When we refer to commercial, that is in contrast to kind of, to me, the three sort of different avenues you can pursue as well. There's four avenues you can pursue as a photographer. There's the fine art world, right? We're familiar with what that means. And then there's consumer photography, which is going to be your wedding photographers, newborns, family, senior portraits, things like that. And then there is commercial, which is anytime we are doing work that is with another business, that we are creating images for the use of that business, whether that business is for-profit or non-profit, that they're using these as promotional images. Sometimes that's in commercials, but sometimes that's social media, that's on their website. Anytime we're using an image in order to promote a business in any way, shape, or form, that's a commercial photo, that's commercial photography. And then there's editorial, which is anytime we are creating images that go somewhere that are meant to tell a story, so not explicitly advertising something. An example being when you open up a magazine, that you have the articles in the magazine, the storytelling, the information, and that there's images that go with that. Those are editorial. They're telling a story, as opposed to then the advertisements that are inside of the magazine, which those are considered commercial. So that kind of helps you understand the difference between commercial, editorial, consumer, and fine art. But now, before we start going through the different kinds of clients and some of the pros and cons and how to connect with these folks, I'm happy to share with you that today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring and creative classes for anyone who loves learning. If you haven't checked out Skillshare before, it is a go-to for me anytime I want to learn something new. Because recently, you may have noticed, I've gotten into stop motion animation, really had a lot of fun digging into that, offering that to clients. But one area that I realized that I was lacking a skill set, and that was in understanding Adobe After Effects. And if you've ever opened up any Adobe product for the very first time, not knowing what to expect, you open it up and you go, how am I going to learn this? Well, good news, hopped over to Skillshare and I was able to find the perfect class for me to learn the basics of Adobe After Effects to create moving portraits with Halis Narvaez. And I loved it because it was like the basics. If you've ever taken a class online or watched a video, that sometimes, you start in and you're like, oh, this person's up here, but I'm down here. Like, I need to start at square one. Halis does a wonderful job of doing that, taking you through navigating the interface, the concept of keyframing, which I finally understand. I'm so excited. I also love that she is a professional in the field and she's sharing best practices. So as I start to incorporate this into my workflow and the work that I do for clients, I know I'm doing it professionally. And as an educator myself, I really appreciate how well organized the class is. She gets straight to the point, gets in there, gets you the education you need, so you can then from there hop in to start creating right away, because that's what it's all about. And of course, you know that I am a huge advocate for continuing education, lifelong learning, and Skillshare is a great way to invest in yourself and your personal growth. And good news, the first 1,000 subscribers to click the link down the description box below get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. So again, a big thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about your future clients. So like I mentioned before, we have commercial photography, photography, we have editorial photography. A lot of food photographers, myself included, do both, and both serve a purpose, both have unique pros and cons, which we'll go through, but let's start off on the editorial side of things. So again, images being used in publications to tell a story. So we're looking at things like magazines and newspapers, and you're like, nobody gets newspapers anymore. I know, but well, my in-laws do, but there are absolutely online versions now of the New York Times, the New York Times cooking section, right? Mr. Andrew Scrivani knows all about that. And things like Bon Appetit, which of course you can buy the hard copy, but there's also the digital online version. But maybe if you're just getting started, you're like, Joni, I'm not gonna go start shooting for Bon Appetit tomorrow. Well, you might, who knows, right? You put enough effort into it. But good news, you can start at the local level. There's some great local magazines, smaller magazines, more accessible magazines, things like Edible magazine. They were one of the very first magazines that I interfaced with here locally in Phoenix. And I think I bumped into them at a food festival. And so you think about, where do magazine folks hang out? Well, they go to local events, they go to national events, they go to wherever the food events are happening. They're the ones with the press passes, right? But it's also super easy to find the information of folks working in the world of editorial, because any publication is going to list out, usually if it's a magazine, in the masthead section, or if it's on their website, there's usually a dedicated page to their staff that shares all the people that are working on that magazine, on that publication. So looking for people like the editor and the photo editor, and we're looking for art directors, creative directors, folks like that, who would be hiring a photographer to do a job. Now, when we look at the pros and cons of editorial, the bad news, is that they don't really have much in the way of budget, that they're getting tighter and tighter and having to do more with less. And it's never been a super lucrative part of the market if you look at all the different kinds of clients that are out there. But the great part about editorial is that it's a wonderful way to connect with other creatives, collaborate with other people on set. You just never know, if you get hired for an editorial shoot, who you may end up working with and who they may be connected to, because that's really the secret sauce of building your business, is just building your connections, and everything can be an opportunity to meet more people, make more friends. Another positive is that often editorial work is a lot more creative in nature. It's not necessarily quite as dialed in. You're thinking outside the box, working with other creative people. But the big opportunity, and the reason why editorial is such an important part of becoming a food photographer and taking opportunities for editorial work, is that it's a great way to build your portfolio, and also the notoriety that comes with the recognition of having been featured in this magazine, having that all-important byline, right? And you never know who might pick up that magazine and see, oh, who's that photographer, right? That may not happen quite as often. But what's great then too is, after the shoot, after the magazine has come out and it's been published, and then you have that beautiful tear sheet. If you look through professional photographers, professional food photographers, they'll typically have a section of their portfolio dedicated to tear sheets, which is what it looks like in the final layout. And that just looks super professional. That really gives a level up to your portfolio and makes somebody who's going through your portfolio go, oh, this person's the real deal. So you're not going to make the big bucks doing editorial work, but it helps to fuel then the commercial side of your business. Now, another subset of the world of editorial is going to be your cookbook photography. Although I really see cookbook photography as unique, because often cookbook photography does have more appropriate budgets in order to produce the work that you're being required to do. Now, of course, across all of these various different kinds of clients across the industry, there are going to be those who can afford your services, and there are going to be those who can't. And that is totally okay. There is going to be some lowball folks running around in the cookbook world. I've come across them, and you just say, yeah, we're not in the same ballpark. But there are plenty of opportunities for well-paying, appropriately paying, value-oriented, understanding the value of quality food photography opportunities in cookbooks. I just want to set that expectation that cookbooks do pay better in general, on average, compared to things like magazines. And you just think about the investment of time that doing a magazine shoot, that may take a couple days, a day, maybe not even, whereas a cookbook, this is a bigger commitment of time and resources resources and effort. So just wanted to make that distinction. I do have a previous video where I've talked about cookbook photography and some of the cookbooks that I've shot, and some really great Q&A that gets into the business side of cookbooks. If you want to check that out, it's linked down below. But so now moving from editorial into the wider category and the more lucrative and profitable part of your business, which is going to be the commercial side of things. And this encapsulates a ton of different kinds of clients. I'm going to hit some of the heavy hitters and maybe some of the ones you haven't thought about. One of the obvious ones is restaurants, right? Anytime I tell somebody I'm a food photographer, either they're going to say, oh, you shoot fake food? Like, oh, I've seen those videos where they pour the motor oil in the pancakes. And I go, no, that's not what I do. You've probably been through this before too. Or the other thing that they say is, so you shoot for restaurants? And for me, I go, not so much anymore. From time to time, I do. But absolutely, restaurants can be an important part of your client roster and can be an area that you really enjoy and specialize in. But just like all of these different kinds of clients we're going to talk about, there are small restaurants and there are big multinational, international restaurants and kind of everything in between. And of course, the way that we work with and service those different kinds of clients, the way that those photo shoots look, that's going to be different. But if you're just getting started out, I think local restaurants are a wonderful place to get started because they have high accessibility. It is not hard to find out who the decision makers are and connect with them. When I was first getting started out, one of the things that I did that I think was a smart move, I didn't really do this on purpose, but kind of going back to the example of how I met folks at the local magazines, is I also met local restaurants at food festivals and food events, like pretty much from, I think, like 2011 to 2016. If there was a food festival in Phoenix, I was there, and I was not just going up and getting my sample at the booths, I was getting my sample and then chatting up whoever was there. And it is, I'm not necessarily a super outgoing person. That may not necessarily come across here in the YouTube videos. You're like, Joni, you're great with people. Yes, but you plot me into a room with a bunch of strangers, and that's definitely stressful. Like, that's anxiety provoking for me. I'm not naturally just outgoing, but I know that it's important in order to further my business to connect with people. And so it's a one at a time proposition, right? You go up to the booth, see who's there, who's hanging out, and start having a conversation. And the great thing about food festivals, food events, specialty dinners, things like that, is the special people are there. It's not just the servers or the hosts, though some of those folks will be there too, but often there's going to be a general manager or the marketing director or even the owner, the chef. Great opportunities to get to know people. Now, if you're a naturally shy person, a little bit of encouragement too is good news. Like, you're not going to have a lack of things to talk about with these folks because it's not about you. This is a really important skill in the sales world, is that you think as a salesperson, you're supposed to be able to talk and talk and talk and then convince people. But in truth, the best salespeople out there are the ones who keep their mouth shut and they listen. Active listening is so important. When you're meeting somebody for the first time, the good news is you can already know that you do have something in common. There is something that has brought both of you both to be there. For me, I'm obsessed with food. I love food. I've loved restaurants, I love dining out. I have since I was a little kid, right? And so I can talk to pretty much anybody in the restaurant industry and have a conversation. But again, it's not about me. It's about getting to know them, asking them open-ended questions like, what's new at the restaurant? What are y'all working on? What do you see that's really popular right now? One of the great questions that opens up a big conversation, a lot of opportunity oftentimes for somebody in the restaurant industry to talk, is to ask them about their first job in the restaurant industry. And inevitably, especially chefs, maybe they started out in the dish room. A lot of them, start out in the dish room or as a busser, and how they worked up through the ranks. Really getting to know somebody's story. It's a great way to bond and build rapport. And don't worry, this is not the moment when suddenly you're supposed to start selling. Like, the goal of these conversations at these kinds of events is not for you to then say, and I'm a food photographer, hire me to do your food photos. Like, no, that's not the point. The point is the long game of building meaningful connections, networking, getting to know people in a given industry. And that happens slowly over time. I'm a long game kind of person. I like to invest my time into people, be generous, be thoughtful, pay attention to them, remember things about them, get to know them. And then eventually, as you continue to do that, if you do that in earnest and you get to know people, and again, it's not about you having some sort of like electric magnetic personality, you'll be surprised at how much people just appreciate somebody who listens to them, who pays attention to them, who remembers things about them, that maybe if you visit the restaurant later, you come back to the restaurant after the food festival, after you've connected with them, go, oh, hey, I remember you from the Devoured Festival, or what have you, that can be memorable. And then suddenly you do that enough over a certain sustained period of time and people start to know who you are. You start to become a known quantity. And hopefully too, in the course of these conversations, it'll be reciprocated back at some point. I can't tell you how many times I get into a conversation with somebody, getting to know them. I mean, I sort of treat meeting a brand new person at a networking event or a food festival or anything for the first time, like I'm interviewing them. And maybe that seems a little intense for folks, but I really want to get to know them because I know that that makes people feel good. People like to talk about themselves and it keeps the conversation from getting boring. So equip yourself with some good open-ended questions and then do the really hard work of active listening. I tell you, active listening will change your life. And then at 2, I promise at some point it will then be reciprocated back, that then in these conversations, somebody's going to ask you, well, what do you do? And then you can say, well, actually, I'm a full-time food photographer, or I'm a professional food photographer, however you want to say it, whatever is your niche, whatever it is that you do. And they go, oh, really? And if you've got a bond and a rapport with that person, they're going to want to help you out, or at least take your card, take your information. So this is networking. Networking is not magic. It's literally just going in with the intent to get to know people and make friends. And now I'm hopping off my soapbox. Bonding and rapport, so incredibly important in what we do. But now getting back to the restaurants, and specifically local restaurants, because again, when you're just getting started, they're going to be the most accessible. They're going to be the easiest to get to. You're going to be able to find contacts easily, make those connections. But one of the cons is that local restaurants do not have big budgets. People say, oh, wouldn't it be so fun to open a restaurant? I go, oh, Lord have mercy. I would never in a million years. Like, you have to be such a passionate person to run a restaurant. It's just incredible because restaurant margins are very, very thin. There's just not a lot of extra money there to afford super duper expensive photography, right? Now, that's not all restaurants. I mean, certainly the bigger the restaurant chains get, the more profitable and all that jazz. But your local mom and pop shop, I promise you, they're running on razor thin margins. So you're not going to be able to charge the big licensing fees and things like that we do with bigger companies, bigger organizations and businesses. But similar to editorial photography, a lot of times local restaurants are super fun to shoot for because they don't necessarily come in with like a lot of specifics and demands and requirements for the photos. Like, they don't necessarily have the visual aptitude that an art director at a top advertising agency would have. Like, you've got a little bit more flexibility. You see the flaws in the photos, but like, these are beautiful, these are amazing, right? And restaurants are a really fun environment. They are definitely a place that'll keep you on your toes. I think they're a great place to cut your teeth because if you can successfully execute a photo shoot in the midst of a chaos of a restaurant, like, you can do pretty much anything because restaurants are nothing if they're not unpredictable. And you could be the best planner on planet Earth and have everything so dialed in and so lined out, and it's still not going to go according to plan. I've got some hilarious stories of restaurants that I'll save for another day. But the hospitality industry is full of wonderful, great people, great connections. So this can be a wonderful confidence builder, a great portfolio builder, and just fun work to do in general. And then as you gain confidence in those smaller restaurants, you can continue to then branch out to larger restaurants and restaurant chains and groups and kind of go up from there. And then that is where you can start to make bigger money. I guarantee you the folks that are shooting for McDonald's are not charging peanuts for that work. Now, I know I said I was done with editorial photography, but actually there is one more category, a big category, a like growing category, brand new category that literally did not exist 20 years ago. I mean, it's definitely had an impact and it's changed and it's morphed. This is where much of the magazine work has gone, is food blogging. That food bloggers have built these incredible businesses and can afford professional food photography services. Now, that's not all food bloggers, but there are definitely a category of food bloggers who can go toe to toe with the big publications of the world, if not outrank the big publications of the world. And so where do we connect with these folks? Well, I would say bloggers are incredibly easy to access. I mean, you go to a blogger conference, there's Facebook groups, there's tons of digital places that you meet bloggers. Bloggers are a very online group of humans, obviously. I actually heard from a member recently in our course communities. She told me that she'd gone to a blogger conference and she came back with more business cards and more blogger leads than she even knew what to do with. Now, of course, the con, maybe you're already seeing this, is that of all those cards that she got, I'm certain there are a number that will not be able to afford her services, right? Not all food bloggers are at the multi-millions of hits per month on their website that some are, but there is definitely a category of some. I shoot for bloggers regularly, and one of the great benefits then in the blogger community is that bloggers are all highly connected to one another. So it's great for referral work, that if you start working with a blogger who you really like and you do great work for them, chances are they will refer them to their friends. That's exactly what happened to me. Started shooting for Tessa at Handle the Heat. She's a regular client here in the studio. And who is her BFF in the blogging world? Well, that's Ashley over at Baker by Nature. And so then that turned into another client. So you can absolutely build a great, profitable, sustainable business in the blogging world. What I will say though is I have also seen plenty of other folks who have started shooting for bloggers and are not charging enough, and they're going for kind of that lower end of the market, that race to the bottom, and they are burned out and they are frazzled, and my heart just breaks because I go, you can't sustain that, right? Because when we look at a business model, you can either do things on volume, right? Think of Walmart, right? We're selling things at a low price, but we're selling a lot of them, so we've got that volume aspect. You translate that to a food photography business, and you want to do food photography on volume at a low price, whew, that makes me tired thinking about it, right? Like the more sustainable business model as a commercial photographer, as a creative person, is to charge a more premium price and do that for less clients, because then you can really put all of your focused energy and creativity into those clients and do your best work. So just pay attention to that business model, right? Please do not run in the race to the bottom. I mean, you can try, but you're gonna be exhausted, you're gonna be worn out. So make sure that if you do jump into any one of these categories, this doesn't just apply to bloggers, don't go for those low pay ones. What we're gonna talk about next week is money, so stay tuned for that. So now back into commercial photography, and kind of the area that I have really focused my business for many years is in working with brands. And when we talk about brands, this can be anything from, you know, the things you see on the grocery store shelves, from ingredients to products, packaged goods, but this can also apply to the world of kitchen appliances, small appliances, big appliances. It just kind of runs the gamut depending on the area that you want to specialize in and the skills that you have when it comes to photography. But they all need food images for sure. So how do we find brands? How do we connect with them? Well, I've made a previous video, I'll link it down below, about how to find the contact information, do some research on LinkedIn. But one of the great, maybe lesser known, although I feel like I hear more and more people attending and knowing about these as opportunities, are trade shows, where these various different brands and companies are all congregating together for the purposes of networking and connecting with people and the retailers who are going to place their products in their stores. But for me, I attended the Fancy Food Show. It's part of the Specialty Food Association. It's a trade show with, you know, kind of all the products that you could imagine on the store shelves at like Whole Foods, or if you're familiar with Phoenix and our retailers here, AJ's, like it's a specialty grocery store here in Phoenix. So that's where you'd see those kinds of products. And again, this is like going to the food festivals. I'm not going up to booths and like hoping that somebody's going to suddenly need food photography. It's an opportunity for networking. It's an opportunity to get to know people, to create visibility. What I will say is anytime you're going to a trade show as a food photographer, etiquette is that you are not there to sell. You are there just to take in information, to absorb things, to get a lay of the land, see what's happening, see the trends, make connections with people. But what really helped me was being able to curate a list and have sort of a hit list to go after, and then following up with emails afterward of things I'd seen at the show and what I liked about their products and things like that, something to open that point of conversation. So there's lots of trade shows all over the world for all sorts of industries. So depending on the area that you want to focus on, pay attention to what shows do these folks go to, and how do you get your foot in the door? For me, one of my first years, I volunteered to help out with a company that I had been doing work with. I volunteered to help out, and so I got one of their passes, and it involved me and one of my best friends creating like a 20-foot charcuterie board. It was bananas, but it got me access to the show floor. I gathered business cards, I got to know people, and followed up after the show. Now, funny enough, these trade organizations themselves also need food photography, and I did work with one such trade organization, and thinking back to where that lead came from, it was actually a referral. And the more clients you take on, the more people you connect with, the more referrals you're gonna find, and those can be great. And this referral actually came from a food stylist who I've worked with for years, love her to pieces. She's been on the channel before. And this trade organization had found her on a food stylist website, reached out to her knowing she was in Phoenix, and asked for a photographer referral. Now, fun little footnote, this is just something to keep in the back of your mind as you start to connect with people, that this particular stylist, there's a number of different food photographers in town, folks she's worked with, and maybe she gave this trade organization a list of photographers to choose from, but I will say I'm definitely on the top of her referral list, and I think part of that is because I think I'm fun. I create a fun environment on set. But I think what really made the difference when we first started working together, remember the first shoot that we worked together on, I paid her, as I do with all my team, I paid the day after the shoot, like right away. There was not any waiting for the client to pay me. Like, I make sure the people I'm working with get paid. And I remember her being so surprised at that. She's like, that was so fast. Like, I only just sent you the invoice. You paid it right away. And I remember that being so meaningful to her. And she's like, what can I do for you? Like, can I come volunteer and help out with like some of the cleanup? And I'm like, no, you're fine. And I think that taking care of people goes a long way. And so that has helped to just bolster that relationship. I think that really just helped to build that trust between us. Now, it would be interesting to go back and ask her, like, was that important to you? But I gotta think it didn't hurt. I'm a firm believer that if you take care of people, they will take care of you. But so when we talk about the pros and cons of working with brands, I mean, sometimes brands are gonna be very particular about what they want and what they need and the way the images should look, that you're not gonna have maybe the flexibility that you would have with smaller restaurants or editorial work, that it's gonna be a bit more dialed in. And certainly some of those images are not gonna be the most exciting, when you're shooting. I remember there was a photo shoot that we did, and it was like these little breakfast sandwiches on a white background, and it was like so boring and so not exciting, but I made a lot of money. And that's the pros in the brands world, is that brands do have the financial means to afford professional photography, and that the ways that they're using those images allow us to charge more for those images because of the benefit it's bringing to those clients. And we're going to talk more about the money next week, but just know that it is definitely going to be a much more lucrative, profitable part of the business. Now, not all brands can afford you. Not all brands are going to see the value in professional photography, right? This is going to be the case in any kinds of clients you work with. Not everybody's going to get it. Not everybody's going to recognize that. But when it comes to brands, there are plenty out there who have money, who have budget, who understand the value of professional photography and how important it is to their business, and can help you in building your profitable business. And so then the last category I'm going to talk about in this video is within the context of commercial photography. Then we also have our agencies. And I would say that this part of the industry, I mean, the overall photography industry, if you weren't aware, has undergone major change. Like, we're in the midst of a very dynamic time as a photographer, and digital media, obviously the internet, has had a massive impact on this industry, and the technology has had a massive impact. And so likewise, with the advent of social media, digital media, ad agencies and various marketing agencies aren't what they used to be, or they're changing, they're morphing. The kind of work that they do, the way that they work with clients, that is changing. So there's not a one size fits all in the kind of agencies, third parties, people who are producing work on the behalf of clients. That is an ever evolving, changing. We have not seen the end of this yet. It's just like tip of the iceberg is kind of how I see it. But one of the nice things about agencies, and I would say this is also true about Editorial, is that they are expecting email pitches, that they are expecting the inbound contacts from somebody who does photography. Now, they may already be working with people, they may have already established relationships, but that photographer who's shooting for them today may not be shooting for them forever. Things change. But also too, maybe they have taken on a bunch of new work and they need additional photographers on their roster, or they need somebody who does this very specific, unique thing that they don't have somebody right now who's able to do that. And so don't worry that if you're reaching out to somebody in an ad agency or at a marketing firm or at a social media marketing agency that they're going to be surprised that they're getting your email. They're not. Like they get lots of these emails, which is then also sort of a negative, because then it's like, well, then they've got a lot of people coming in. But your work is special. There's only one of you. So keep that in mind. And it is well worth investing the time. Don't just think, oh, they get so many emails, they're just going to delete mine. Yeah, maybe they will, but maybe they won't. Maybe this happens to be a day when they're like, oh, I need a photographer for this job and my usual person's out, and suddenly there you are in their inbox and they're like, oh, this is amazing. Or maybe that email, they throw it into like a subfolder somewhere that, at some point, if they need to look for photographers, that they've got you in that holding tank, and then like 2 years later, they're like, hey, you still doing blah, blah, blah. And you go, oh, wow, you just came out of the woodwork. I can't tell you how many times somebody I connected with or pitched or contacted or met like years ago suddenly just shows up out of nowhere. It happens. You'll be surprised. This is also a reminder to the investment in the long game. It will pay off. And I know it's scary and you're like, I just need clients now. But it is well worth the investment in those long-term relationships, planting the seeds so that they start to grow. Now, one other sort of traditional positive of working with agencies, although again, because this part of the industry is so kind of all over the place right now and so rapidly changing, not always the case, but often agencies, especially established agencies, are going to be familiar with image licensing and usage terms, and that is not going to be a foreign concept to them. They're going to expect that. But I would say more and more I'm running into agencies and folks that I'm working with who are not savvy in that, who I need to do some education. There was one recently where I had to explain copyright. So, it's not necessarily something that's standard across the board, but something to kind of just be aware of. But no matter what part of the industry you're pursuing, I hope the message that reads loud and clear is that your job to help advance your business is in connecting with people, and not in the transactional way of like having some sort of like magic potion or perfect script or thing that's gonna just magically make people wanna hire you. It's about building relationships. It's looking at the world and saying, how can I go make friends today? That approach will take you so much further. Again, it's gonna take a while to pay off, but it's well worth the effort. And so thank you for showing up here today. Thanks for watching this video, getting all the way through it. Like I said, next week we're talking about money. Oh, everybody loves to talk about money. We're gonna get into that next week. And thank you so much as always for hanging out with me. It's a pleasure to get to share my journey with you. So with that, have a wonderful week. I'll see you later. Bye.